no, yeah, I'm audible, okay. So hi everyone, namaste, and basically I'm here to talk about React Advanced Patterns, but before that, let's do some yoga. Yeah? So everyone, yeah? Yeah, yeah? That's nice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you so much. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about React Advanced Patterns. And often I compare it with doing yoga is because when you do yoga, you cannot reach a very high level posture just at once. You need to grow slowly. I mean, you learn slowly and you reach at that level. Just like learning React, you cannot learn everything at once. All of the advanced stuff is learned by you step by step. Who here wants to be an awesome developer? Everyone? Yeah? Yeah? So yeah, let's today to be an awesome developer, let's learn some advanced stuff. A bit about me, I'm a web engineer at N26. I mostly work on React, GraphQL and JavaScript. I'm also an organizer of React India, which is happening in September. That's about me. I also have some N26 stickers, so if you find me, just take away some stickers from me. We're also hiring, so just look at the job link and you can definitely, if you find anything relative to you, just apply. Okay, so when you start learning React, like probably when I started learning React, it was something like this. Like I couldn't figure out, okay, what's happening, what's state, what's props, because it's way different from the real JavaScript world, right? And day 2 is like, oh my God, I don't want to work. Let's just throw off. And then day 3, it's like, okay, I got it running, the first counter example, yay! And I'm like, oh yes, I did it. And then day 5 is like, I don't want to hear from anyone, I'm in my own zone and I want to learn more of React, right? But after a few days of learning React, you just go on and on and on, and you learn some patterns from here and there. You see on Twitter, okay, can see dots, oh my God, this is a good pattern. And you go on and on, you learn about certain patterns, and maybe you discover your own patterns, right? So yes, this is the start of the talk. This is the title of the talk. We're going to learn about advanced React patterns, hopefully in next few slides. The first thing that we're going to talk about is compound components, which means what happens here is the compound component works with having a control, the entire control with the parent. So maybe you have different child, but the control still remains with the parent. So parent decides what is going to happen with all of the children. So let's look at the code. Let's say you think of a compound component as a select, and you want to pass different options to it basically, but you want the entire control to still remain with the select. So this is the first approach, like the traditional old approach what you would follow, or maybe something like this, but this is like madness. You shouldn't do this, like passing options with key value. No, I wouldn't go for this. Okay, this looks really good. What I'm trying to do here is, I have a radio group which is my parent component, and what I'm trying to do is on change, I'm going to get the value of the radio option, which means my rendering control still remains with the parent, right? And you can add as many options as you want. So the radio option looks something like this, which takes in the props. So that means my on click and is selected here is coming from the props. And let's see what the radio group looks like. So if you see in the render, what radio group is trying to do is basically get all of the children and map over it and get all the props and return them. So here you basically don't care whatever options you're trying to render, but basically the order still remains intuitive. I mean, you need to be strict on the ordering. So you can just add as many options as you want, and it works. But there's a problem. If you see in this code here, if ever I just go and add a div to it, it might not work. It will stop working. It's because when you do React.children, it looks for its first children, which means in this case, it will look for radio option, but it did not find any. And it found div, which doesn't have any prop, so to say, and it will not work. So it's still a problem. We need to make it more flexible, right? So also one example of compound components. So semantic UI React follows the same concept of compound components. So here you might notice that I'm just importing the form, whereas all other components like form group and form input under the hood automatically follows this pattern of compound components. So as I spoke that there's a bit of problem in our compound components, we need to make it more flexible so that when we share the state between our components, it's more explicit. So here what we do is it's basically a better version of compound components, because what we use is we use React Context API to share the state between our child components. So you'll see in a bit how the code looks like. What you do basically here is you try and create your context, and then it's the same thing that you follow here. Basically your radio group here is nothing but your provider. That means you're going to provide the value, whatever you want to provide, and obviously there has to be a consumer now. So what your consumer looks like is something like this, wherein you say, okay, you spread all the props, and then basically you try and return all the children with the context, right? So that means the code will look something like this. I have an extra div. Now each consumer has its own context, which means I have my own context, and from the context I can take whatever method I want, whatever property I want. So this is much more flexible because down the line you can just, your product manager might say, okay, you know what, I want some element here, so you might just go and add, and it still works, it doesn't matter. Next is prop collection. This is not very much exclusive, but still we use it in our day-to-day job. And why is it not? Okay, so it's mostly a pattern where we access props from the parent by passing a single object of props, which means something like this. So everybody does this in their code. Whenever you want to pass a prop to that particular component, you basically spread it on that required component. But let's say, because this prop also has a method, let's say you want to implement your own method. That means maybe in your component where you're trying to spread it, you want to maybe combine it with your own method, with your own handler in the sense. So you would do something like this. That means you would have the parent method as well as your own method combined with it, which looks a little bit messier to me because I would not follow this pattern. Instead, so there's something called as prop getters, and what it does is, instead of spreading the object, I would spread the function call, which means I would do something like this. And then, this is a much better solution, because in this case what happens is, now it is up to the parent to provide the mechanism to whether, what should be called, whether the child should be called or maybe the parent method should be called. So this gives you much more flexibility. I am not supposed to say much over this, but still a short overview. How higher order component works is much like it accepts the components and it returns a much enhanced version by enhancing or putting some props in your component. So maybe a very good example that I really like to do, because we often make a fetch call, right? In every company we make a fetch. It's required because nothing can work. the data is required. And I often prefer that, you know, a fetch HOC really looks good, because then you can have a control on your loading state, your error state, or maybe, you know, your data state. So I often find this example very, very good, but there's a problem to it, because there's a problem. The problem which is here is called prop collision. So if you see here, let's say, you know, you want 2 data sets to be rendered, what you would do is you would use 2 fetch HOCs, right? But in this case, since both of your prop name URL are the same, only one might work and the second one might not work. So you have to be a little careful while using HOCs. So yeah, I mean, the problem is prop collision. So you have to be like a little careful that you don't use the same prop name. So use HOC, but be aware like what side effects they give you around the ecosystem. So for this matter, what happens is render props gives you some more, you know, great stuff. You know, every image is just attached to, you know, learning yoga at every step. So what render props does is it's simply, you know, passing a function to your prop, which in this case, what it looks like, it always gives you that benefit of separating your UI from your logic. So let's see the same example of what we saw, like the fetch HOC. How would we do the same thing using render prop? So yeah, if, the example which I'm going to show is very similar to a Polo query if you've used, if any one of you have used GraphQL. It looks something like this. Okay, you have your fetch component, and what it does is, okay, you know, it has the data state and it has the error state, which is managed in the component did mount. But let's see how this looks like. So here, the prop collision will never matter, because, you know, it works in the manner that it has its own function which is passed as a prop, so it wouldn't matter. So this is where, you know, it's much better than HOC, and that is why people use it more. So yeah, so the next pattern which I would like to say is the provider pattern, which we spoke before as well. So it's like using the new context API, which means I would say, okay, you know, I have a provider and I have a consumer. My provider will always give me the value, and the consumer will be the place while I always absorb the value. And you can have multiple consumers, it doesn't matter. So next is, I'm talking about hype-driven development. Anybody can guess what I'm going to talk about? Oh, that's nice. Oh, because I know. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about hooks. Who here uses hooks in production? Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, hooks, I like hooks, but let's go through the slides. And yeah, so this is the state with the React devs right now. I mean, you know, the ecosystem is growing so fast that the picture might change in, you know, 1 year or 2 years down the line. But yeah, right now it looks something like this. And yeah, let's go through some of the problems with classes, like why React team decided to, you know, introduce hooks on the first place. So yes, there were some confusions with the classes, but what were these confusions? Like, you know, people say that, okay, classes are bad, but what was really bad about it? I still don't consider them bad. So yes, often how many of you have like gone through this problem while starting your career? The this in JavaScript? No one? Okay. So yeah, I mean, I myself took a lot of time to learn how this works. And it's the same thing, like the this binding in React, like you have to bind all your methods in the constructor is really awful, which is okay. The second thing what happens is, you could also always see that whatever unused methods you have are not stripped in the compile time when you use classes. And one of the more thing are, if you see the minified version, like the bundle, you would see that the lifecycle methods are still not minified. It has the same name. So in classes, it works like this. And I would also like to talk about the wrapper hell, which I think almost every application, I mean, if you work on React, every application has it, because you tend to use a lot of logic in your component did mount, and then you have your Apollo providers and all that of stuff, and your wrapper hell goes to something like this. Yeah? And yeah, we all have it, so let's be true to ourselves. So, but then these are the problems which we might reduce using hooks. So let's take a quick glance at useState, how it works. So this was a traditional method how we used to do. It's a very simple example because I didn't want to make it more complicated. It's a very simple example which handles the counter, and this is how you would do traditionally by using classes, right? But what happens when you do it using useState hooks? What happens is it's very simple. You don't need class first of all, and you can do everything in a functional way. Because I myself, a lot of times when I was working with React, what I did is, okay, I saw, okay, you know, there's no state thing, let me just work with functional, and suddenly someone comes up and says, okay, you know, these are the further features that you would want to add, and I then had to convert my functional component to class component, and this is what happens with everyone here, right? True? Who has done that? Yeah. So, I mean, what here you would do is you would use useState as your hook, wherein you can pass the initial value to it, which doesn't need to be an object. It can be string, it can be number, it doesn't matter. So 0 here is the initial value which I want the count value to hold, and set count works the same way, just like you set the state. So that means you can take the benefit of using state, this dot state in the functional pattern. So yeah, everything is cool. Let's see. So this is what I was telling about. This line basically gives you a gist of how you would set the initial state, which means your count value to 0, which you would do in the class component using this dot state is, you know, the initial value should be 0. Let's see the effect hook, how this works. So effect hook, to give you a more benefit where you would use it, it's very equivalent to the functions, like it's an alternative where you would use like instead of component did mount and component did update, you would basically use use effect. Now there's one problem. So this is the traditional method, how it works. So basically what I'm trying to do here is, I'm setting some title here to that particular state. So this is how you would do it. But with use effect, what you do is you say, okay, in use effect, just set the same thing. But now one thing to see here is this effect will run after every render. So that means this is a flaw, right? I don't want that, like it should not run after every render. But there's a benefit that is given by React team. You could pass the second argument as an array, and it will only rerun the effect if something changes. So this is a good thing. This is a saying by me that if you want to make a better world, a better place for React developers, start using hooks. Minify your code better, which in my sense, I believe that all of us want the minified code to be of a lesser size, right? We all want the minified code to be just as less as possible. So I did a small experiment with the counter example, and if you see the same thing, it will actually make a lot of effect in your production code, in your production application. So this is a code which I used to, like, it's just a counter example which I minified it, and this was the difference. Like 3.5 KB and 2.47 KB. I know it's not very much huge, but when you start dealing with larger applications, you will actually see the difference. Also, the lines of code is pretty much reduced. So yeah, smaller bundles is happiness. At least for me, it's happiness. Yes, I mean, everything comes with its own power. So if something is given to you, you need to follow rules. Otherwise, you are forbidden. I mean, so there are some rules for hooks. You should always use it at the top level. Don't use it in for loops. Don't don't ever use it in for loops. Just use it at the top level of your component, and always use hooks in React functions. That means it's not your JavaScript functions, but your React functions. One thing to also ask, like I get a lot of questions when I started using hooks in my company, like we thought over this and we thought like, does it cover all the use case as classes cover now? Yes, they do, but there are some limitations to it, like they're still working on few methods, like component did catch and get snapshot for update. They're still working on this. There is no alternative for this in hooks, but I'm sure React team is pretty much good. And yeah, I mean, they will have something like in next coming months, and you'll be like, on Twitter, I'm converting this to this, I'm converting this to this. But yeah. And yeah, so this is one of the website which I really like, because people people are building custom hooks, and they are using it. So I mean, a lot of custom hooks, if you really want to see how many people are building stuff and how many people are using custom hooks in their applications, there's a lot of things. It's called usehooks.com, and you can definitely visit it. Some key takeaways from hooks are, the use effect is always expressed as a combination of component did mount, component did update, and will unmount. So these three are the direct alternatives where you can use effect. Also, should component update is an alternative for React.memo, which I'll be explaining in my later slides. One more thing is you don't need to use constructor if you're using useState, because all of your state initialization and everything is just taken care. As I said before, that they're still working on component did catch and get snapshot before update, but we'll soon have some alternatives for them. Use context. Yes, this is also one of the hooks, and we actually started using in our company pretty much like 1 month ago. And this is one of my colleague actually built a helper so that we can use hooks as a helper in classes. So I will show you that's the link basically for the repo, but I'll show you what it actually looks like. So we wanted to convert our old context API to the new ones using use context hooks, but definitely we wanted to use in the class. So this is what it used to look traditionally, using context types. And what we did was, we did something like this. So if you see the last line, hook into props, which takes a custom hooks and again takes the component, and you can use it in the class, which means under the hood, hook into props looks something like this. It accepts the custom hook, it accepts a component, and then spreads the prop on that particular component. This is one of the things which I really like, and we use it in our company right now. So yeah, React.memo, which I was talking about, is basically an alternative for pure component, which means you don't want your component to render every time, and it should render only when there is a prop change. So it's very easy. You just need to wrap your component with React.memo and nothing else. So you can also wrap your existing component. You just make sure that you wrap it with React.memo, or you can still use the traditional approach of your component. I mean, it doesn't matter, but there's an alternative which they released. So yeah, now the question is, can I use hooks yet? Yes? No? Yeah? Yes. Okay, so yeah, why not? Just use it. But I would say it's not very much mandatory to, just use it. I mean, use it as per your convenience and, as per the resources availability in your company. Because it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, what matters is the product should be running, right? It doesn't really matter, okay, inside, I've used hooks, I've used this. It doesn't really matter. So there was a question which people asked me, and it was like, how do we test custom hooks? It's altogether a new topic, and I would love to discuss if anyone wants to discuss after the talk. But yes, this is a very good link. If you really want to test custom hooks, how people test it, you could just go and look at this link. Yeah, I mean, all I want to say from this picture is, just don't go blankly with the hype, like just because okay, the React team released hooks, okay, I want to follow that path, and I want to do something very quickly. Wait, take a chill, relax, and then use hooks. Otherwise, this will be the case. Yeah. I would also like to discuss some of the best practices, which I think in my case is better, and I follow it. So function in set state, like whenever you are depending on the previous state while setting your state, make sure that you use function in your set state instead of just using object. So not something like this, but something like this, where you know, okay, what is your previous state. Unwanted updates. So this is more about, so this is more about like, our component renders and re-renders every time, and even when it doesn't have to re-render. So there's a sort of helper which someone made it. I think it's a Meki, and he basically, so this plugin basically helps you to puts your console on fire. Like you could actually see that which components are rendering, unknowingly, and it shouldn't do that. So it basically puts your console on fire. So what you have to do is nothing, just go and make sure that you don't do it in your production code, because you might end up losing your job. But yeah, so this is what you can do it. You can basically wrap it around, why did you update, and that's the link for it. It's on GitHub. Also destructuring and spreading the props. This is one of the thing which I think, people should know. So this is basically a prop which I'm trying to spread, but I'm using both of them, right? I know I'm using both of them. Why should I do that? Instead, why not do this? Like I know for a reason that I'm going to spread all of the props, and I need it on that component. Also, next thing, when okay, you need only some of the props. You need only some of the object from them. Like here, what I need is, I don't need A, but I need rest of them. So you could do something like this. You could spread the rest. Display names. This is also one, beneficial, but only in some cases. So what happens when you wrap your component around HOC, higher order component, what happens is you cannot actually see the name of the component in React DevTools. But if you do something like this, like you give a name to your component, you could actually see. So it's only beneficial when you're trying to use higher order components. Some things about conditional rendering, I think all of us know. Okay, when this is true, do render this, otherwise render this. So one more example, when you want to make sure, okay, something is true, then do this. Conditional rendering in array. Who here thinks the first one is correct? It's correct? No. So yeah, this is one of the things that, I mean, I made a mistake a lot of times. So I just want to be sure that people don't make it. It's like you should always check it with 0, and because 0 might still exist and you're trying to do something, you're trying to render something. So just in case.
But if you know that this value can be only 0 or not 0, why don't you use it?
Yeah.
Like without.
Exactly. You should use this approach.
Second?
Yeah. It's because dot. Sorry. Yeah, if it's not array, yes. Yeah.
So if it's math, you can use size and still the first parent would work.
No, I mean, when you're trying to deal with 0, let's say if it's 0 and you want to make sure that, okay, if it's 0 and then do something, it doesn't make sense. The first ones would still work. In the second case, you need to make sure, okay, it is greater than 0 and only then it should work. And okay. So basically, I started working on this repo last year in November, and I collected all of the stuff that is coming in. So you can just go and have a look. So it's like any pattern that's coming into, I'm trying to push in so that people have it at one place. Because when I was dealing with React, I just wanted to know, what pattern is this called? Like, what am I even doing? So, I made sure, okay, if people want to visit and, they want to get hold of something, I have created a repo. You can definitely go and visit. And thank you.
We have some time for questions, so. Questions?
Have you, thanks for your talk. Have you considered about this if you have a Redux in a system and use it with the hooks? Is it?
I didn't get your question, sorry.
Have you considered using Redux and hooks together?
Not yet, because in my company we're using GraphQL, but I don't think it should be any problem. I mean, it should work totally fine.
More questions? Or everybody just want to go to the lunch?
Go for the food!
All right, so thanks, Manjula.